The 2025 NFL Draft has a tight end class that is looking better and better with each passing week. What is going on, everybody? Good morning. We are here on Wednesday. Today's the day where things start to get real before a Sunday game. You get your first full practice, you get your first injury report, and we'll be talking about that later today, obviously, when we get that information. But we're not quite there yet, so let's detour into some discussion of college football as it pertains to the 2025 draft class. We do this every week. We do 2 videos. First video, this video is going to be about the offense. These are going to be some guys on offense at positions that I'm interested in that are, I think, playing well. And some of these guys obviously playing better than others, but they're standing out in at least a mostly positive context. So we're going to go ahead and start with the quarterbacks here. Going to go ahead and take a look at what's going on there. Unfortunately, it continues to be a quarterback class that just doesn't really do much for me. This is a quarterback class that it's not 2020, what was that one? 2022, but I'm not super optimistic about this group. The guys who played well this week, there were some. Drew Allar of Penn State played a really good game, only threw 2 incomplete passes, 3 touchdowns. Ran the ball effectively, 247 yards on 19 attempts. Very efficient. I wanted to see more from him this year, but honestly, of the guys who people are talking about as a potential NFL caliber quarterback, Drew Allar is becoming one of my favorites. And it hasn't been a great year for him. This was a great game for him, 82.1 PFF grade. Don't get me wrong, not taking anything away from him, but I don't think Drew Allar is going to be some first-round pick now. But at the same time, if you could get him in day 2 or maybe even early day 3, that's something that I might get behind. That's something that does it for me. So he's probably going to end up being a guy that I like more than a lot of the experts, Drew Allar. Shedeur Sanders had another good game statistically. He did turn it over twice, 340 yards and 3 touchdowns, though, 30 of 41. He can still play. It's just there are other things going on with Shedeur beyond his ability to play that it's really hard to get on board with. It's very easy to imagine him flaming out for reasons that have nothing to do with his physical talent, but the talent's there. So Cade Klubnik, who, by the way, has fallen completely off the draft board on the database. He's now in the 300s. I don't get it. To me, Klubnik is clearly worthy of a draft pick, even if it's only a day 3 one. But 27 of 41, 288 yards, 2 touchdowns, ran for 40 yards and a touchdown. Did lose a fumble. 86.8 PFF grade gets it done, though. Carson Beck. Now, we as fans of football know better than to think Carson Beck is going to be a good quarterback. But 25 of 40, 350 yards almost, 2 touchdowns, ran the ball for 32 yards and a touchdown. He did have a very good game for Georgia. And we can give credit where credit is due while also acknowledging that he's just not that good. He was good this week, though, 85.9 PFF grade. Life's a little bit easier when you're not being put in any disadvantageous situations. And that is the Carson Beck formula. And the final guy, the only other guy I could find that I thought stood out this week was Kyle McCord. And that's another guy who we know better than to covet. There's nothing covetable with Kyle McCord. Had a nice game this week for Syracuse, 323 yards and a touchdown, ran for 16 yards, 82.2. It's a good game, but he's still Kyle McCord. Still Kyle McCord. Still not good. So you can see how thin this is getting. Once you lose interest in the guys like Jalen Milroe and Carson Beck, and to a certain extent, I'm also off Shedeur, although that's a different argument. It's just not the class that some people were hoping for, and this doesn't surprise me, but it is something that we now have to account for. Wide receivers this week were a little bit forgettable. I could only find 4 guys. Usually I find 5. especially in this class, I'll find 5. But I'll tell you, don't get me wrong. We know McMillan's good. We know Burden is good. We know how good these players are, but they don't have big games. And a lot of it is because they don't have good quarterbacks. A lot of it is because they're not in good situations. But those guys do not have big games, it feels like. McMillan had 300 yards the first game of the season. I don't even know if he's averaging 300 yards in a month right now. But of what we had, Evan Stewart of Oregon stood out in a really tough game for Oregon that they barely gutted out. 10 catches, 92 yards, 69 on Pro Football Focus. So we will certainly highlight that. He's a guy who is edging into the second round now. Ja'Cory Brooks of Louisville, 9 catches, 104 yards, 75 PFF grade, 12 targets, fairly efficient. Still not necessarily something you'd say was extraordinary, right? It's just a good game for a receiver. We do have some new names on the receiver list this week because the typical stalwarts were not very good. Keandre Lambert of Auburn, 6 catches for 104 yards and a touchdown, 70.8, 8 targets. And another new name here, a Florida guy. We haven't talked about Florida a lot this year. Elijah Badger, 6 catches, 131 yards and a touchdown, 88.2. So he was one of the standout guys this week. But you can see that even the guys that I found, they had good games. I don't know if they had transcendent games. So it's kind of cooled off at the receiver position, I feel like. There are still guys who are good, but they're not putting up the big numbers. Okay, tight end. Now, this is a position that I feel like is starting to get a little bit better. And this week, it actually stood out more than the receiver position, which is not easy to do. I mean, Tyler Warren has ascended to maybe tight end 1 by the time this season's over. Tyler Warren might end up being the number 1 tight end over Loveland at this point. I don't think he should be, but it could happen. And he's just been going off. This week, 8 catches, 8 targets, 127 yards and a touchdown. Best receiver in that game by far. And 3 carries for 63 yards and a rushing touchdown. So he's doing that H-back stuff. 87.4. His grade got dragged down a little bit because he had a bad rep in pass protection. But, I mean, his production for this Penn State offense is eye-popping. It is really notable, the stuff he's doing. He has almost 200 yards from scrimmage. Oscar Delp of Georgia. Haven't talked about him all season because he hasn't been productive. He finally had a good game. And this is one of those guys who is extremely talented. He just hasn't been productive yet. So even a game like this is very noticeable. 4 catches, 5 targets, 56 yards, 2 touchdowns, 88.9. Maybe we're getting somewhere with Oscar Delp. It's probably too late for him. I don't even know if he's going to be in this draft at this point. Maybe he stays back another year so he can actually have a productive year if he can. But very talented. Harold Fannin, he's almost always here. The Bowling Green man. 10 catches, 137 yards, 2 touchdowns, 12 targets. Very efficient, explosive, finds the end zone. 93.7, you can't beat it. It's hard to beat it. He is very productive. I don't know how much of it translates to the NFL, but we're certainly taking note. Gadsden made the list again. Another really good game by Gadsden after basically being left for dead. 8 catches, 8 targets, 109 yards, 76.9, catching the ball from Kyle McCord at Syracuse. So we like what's going on there. He's a guy that I remember talking about last year, and then he just got hurt. Well, he is back. The final name is somebody who is kind of a late riser. He's starting to really bump up the draft boards lately. Mason Taylor of LSU. It wasn't a great game for him or anything, but I did want to at least have him here so we could shed a little bit of light on a guy who is looking like he will be a day 2 pick now. And I don't even think he was really on the radar until recently. Now, this game was not great. 6 catches, 59 yards, 11 targets, so not very efficient, but Mason Taylor has become a name now. All right, so all that's left is the offensive line, and we focus in on 3 positions here. We have left guard first. Left guard, we got Tyler Booker of Alabama. Now, there are a couple Alabama players on this list. Understand they were playing Mercer, so they were playing Joe competition. So take everything you see Alabama do this week with a grain of salt. Nevertheless, Booker, 0 pressures allowed, 189 rushing yards by Alabama, 74.8 PFF grade. So he's starting to string together some really strong performances, and he's really getting into gear to make sure the NFL front offices know what he's about. Donovan Jackson of Ohio State. One thing to note with Donovan Jackson is that he has moved to left tackle in the last few games. So he's currently playing left tackle. I think he's still very clearly a guard at the NFL level, but it's worth noting he's playing pretty well at tackle. I think that's a feather in his cap. 1 pressure allowed in this game, 173 rushing yards by OSU, over 5 yards a carry, 68.5 PFF. I can live with that when he's playing out of position all day. And then the third guy, Dylan Fairchild, a Georgia guard. Didn't allow any pressures. Georgia didn't have a very good running game. They don't run the ball that well this year in general. I don't think you pin that necessarily on 1 or even 2 players. 3.4 yards a carry. Not up to Georgia standard. 69 PFF grade. It's, okay. It's workable. But, yeah, those would be the left guards. Centers, again, we have an Alabama guy and we have a Georgia guy. I keep going back to those 2 teams in these segments because they consistently have some of the best interior linemen in the country. Brailsford, again, he's playing a joke team, but no pressures allowed. They ran the ball decently, 82.1. He remains a very interesting target if he enters the draft this year. Jared Wilson of Georgia didn't allow any pressures. Again, Georgia did not run the ball that well, but I hesitate to say that's really on Jared Wilson specifically. 75 PFF grade. And the final center, and I believe this is a new one, Gus Hartwig of Purdue. Purdue's actually got a couple notable offensive linemen on their team this year. He did allow 1 pressure at the center spot, and Purdue struggled to run the ball. They only ran the ball for 3 yards a carry, but Hartwig played pretty well, 70.5 PFF grade. So that's going to be a new name to enter into our minds as we enter the draft season. And then finally, the last thing we're going to look at in this video is going to be right tackle. Right tackle, I found 4 guys, including Cameron Williams, who has maybe gotten to the point now where he is the top right tackle in this draft. Him and Emory Jones are going to be duking it out. But Cameron Williams of Texas, 0 pressures allowed. Texas ran the ball not efficiently, but they did grind out 140 yards, 72.6. Emory Jones, meanwhile, and I think, by the way, I misspelled his name. Let me get that. 2 pressures allowed, and LSU really didn't run the ball well, 3 yards per carry, but on the whole, he did play a good game, 73.5 PFF grade. He is starting to slip a little bit. I think he had a play in this game where he picked up a fumble and then fumbled himself or something. Obviously not what you want to be seeing from an offensive lineman. We saw this on Monday night with the Cowboys. If you're an offensive lineman and you pick up the ball, just fall down. But yeah, he is still a very good offensive lineman. Jack Nelson of Wisconsin, 1 pressure allowed against Oregon. Keep that in mind. Wisconsin ran the ball okay. Remember, they are playing Oregon, probably the best team in the country. 130 rushing yards, 68.4. Against Oregon, I'm pretty impressed. Finally, last guy this week, Armand Membo of Missouri, the Tigers. Allowed 1 pressure, about 4 yards a carry, 144 rushing yards, 83.1 PFF. So that's going to be one of the better performances this week by a tackle. And that's all I could find this week for the offensive line stuff. Pretty good, though. Pretty good. Overall, the main thing that stands out this week would just be the receivers. We didn't have a lot of top-level receiver performances, but the tight ends made up for it. All right, I'm going to get out of here. Another video coming later where we go through some defensive guys. I'll see you guys later today. Go Hawks. More videos coming. Let me know what you guys think down below.